Okay, so we now have a unit list for the Baltic Battalion, and I'm going to go over it. And this isn't like this isn't the same as when they revealed the Striker Cav or the SOCOM or Airborne or the Coastal Troop Specializations. This is just a list of the units. They say here that a proper dev diary with more details about each category and units is coming next week, and I will be making a video about that. In case you missed it, our live event about the Baltic Battalion is coming soon. It will be live on March 16th on our Twitch, and we will talk about it. And I suspect they're going to make a post on. Steam, like this one, about that next week. So I'm probably going to be doing that. I'm probably going to be looking over that and the proper dev diary for the Baltic Battalion in the same week. Or in the same video. Which means that's probably going to be longer than normal. So I've looked through these pictures. And some of them are very, very interesting. And I kind of want to highlight a few points in this video because they have, well, I mean, I just said that they're very interesting. Some of these have the chance to be really interesting, depending on exactly how they take it. So first we have the overall image. This is typical. It's got all the different units lined up and stuff. Nothing super crazy or special. And then we have reconnaissance. And looking at some of these, now, unfortunately, they don't really group the infantry up, and they don't label them either, so I can't really tell you what's what. However, I have noticed a couple of interesting things about some of the vehicles. So what we have here is we have the Spartan, which are these APCs over here. And then we have the Scimitars, which are these little light vehicles here, which, if memory serves, had a 30mm autocannon. They're kind of like mini tanks, except they're not tanks. There was another variant of the Scimitar, or at least something that uses the same chassis, that had a 76mm a 76mm gun in the turret instead of the 30mm autocannon. It doesn't appear that we have that upgrade, but it is considered a light tank. Or at least the version with the 76mm gun is considered a light tank in that configuration. But with the 30mm autocannon, I believe the British considered it an armored reconnaissance vehicle, which is the configuration we have here. However, of the four vehicles we have, the Spartan, which, again, if memory serves, is these APCs, the Scimitar, which are these vehicles over here. We also have the Land Rover Defender, which isn't actually named down here, and the TGB 1111. And I'm not sure which one of these two it is, but I guess it doesn't really matter, but we still have light vehicles. One thing I'd like to point out, though, is that these two in the front here, they remind me very much of the UAZ. Armory. Where is it? I am blind. Where is it? There it is. The UAZ. Because the UAZ also has an option between an ATGM in the form of the Faggot M and the SPG-9 recoilless rifle. You know, I wonder how long it's going to be until YouTube hits me with some sort of, dude, you're pointing that thing at the back of your buddy's head. Please point it somewhere else. Thank you. I wonder how long it's going to take YouTube to hit me with some sort of of stupid penalty for using the NATO reporting name, at least I think it's the NATO reporting name, for this missile system. Regardless. It also, however, you appear to have a recoilless rifle and an ATGM system. And interestingly enough, as I'm looking at these pictures, I'm looking at them on my phone so I can zoom in closer. But as I'm looking at these pictures, one of them has a presumably 7.62 millimeter machine gun over here, and the other one does not. So I wonder if that 7.62 is going to be an upgrade. Much like how you can have the option of tacking a 7.62 on most transport vehicles like a Humvee or a MTV. So, but still, we've got what appears to be some kind of recoilless rifle and an ATGM, which I don't think that's Javelin. I think that might be Milan or Spike. I'm not sure. And then we have the Land Rover Defender over here, and this is pretty simple and straightforward. You've got, again, it's very UAZ-like, with the guy with the 10.62 millimeter machine gun in the passenger seat, but you have an option in much the same vein as the RSOV for either a 40 or for either an M2 Browning or a Mark 19. I know this is a Mark 47. In this case, it appears to be a Mark 19 in this picture. So I guess that would be a better comparator, but you don't have the guy in the passenger seat. This would also be a better comparison, but again, you don't have the guy in the passenger seat. This is actually a transport, which I do believe the Land Rover is supposed to be. And you do get an option between a 50 cal or a Mark 19, but again, you don't have the M2 Browning at the, or not M2 Browning, the 7.62 in the passenger seat. Huh. Anyway, I digress. So it looks like we have an armor package, obviously, for the excuse me. It looks like we have an option to put an armor package on the scimitars. It seems very basic, just like a simple cage armor. So I'm guessing it'll work the same way cage armor works in the game, where where's motorized? There's motorized. Where it doesn't really boost the kinetic protection and basically just adds. Okay, well that's a decent boost to kinetic protection, but it just adds a about 100 more armor, for lack of a better term, to heat protection, which should mainly protect against, at least if I understand the way the damage system works, protect against things like light autocannons, or nearby artillery blasts, and things like shoulder-fired anti-armor weaponry. But let's be honest here, that heat protection isn't going to be doing too much against things like AT-4s or RPG-26s. That is, of course, assuming that the heat protection works the same way it does here, which I'm guessing it does, because if I go over to something like... Where's armored? There it is. You see the same basic interaction here on the M113. I'd also like to point out that on the Spartan, which I'm guessing is your light armored transport, you have several different options. You appear to have an option, a basic option, over here, with... I don't see, as I'm zooming in on this, I don't see any weapons. You might have a 7.62 millimeter. It's kind of hard to tell, though. If you go over, you've got an RWS, which has replaced most of that large raised hatch with what appears to be an M2 Browning. And then if you go over again, we have an RWS with what appears to be some kind of extra box attached to the right side of the RWS. I'm assuming this is either going to raise the optics from maybe something like 1750. I'm assuming that just with the RWS, you're probably going to have optics values... Actually, hang on. Assuming we're talking about... assuming we're using the base game as, well, a base, the only transport vehicle, or the only recon vehicle I could think of that has an RWS is the Humvee RWS. I can't think of anything else here that has a an RWS. And this has a view range of 1750. Now, that's not to say that it's going to stay at 1750. Where is this thing? That goes 1750, 1750, 1750, 24, 24. And then you have options like, because that's 24, I know that's 24. That's also 1750, and I don't think that's the wrong one. I don't think that changes. Although you think the sniper would provide better view range, but I guess that's not active unless the vehicle's moving. Anyway, the point I'm trying to get at is this extra box on the side of the RWS, because you're probably going to have a visual range of around 1750, maybe 2,000 meters with the RWS. This extra box could be one of two things. Either number one, it can upgrade the visual range of the RWS, much like the the BRDM-3 here. If you go with the AT, it says turret. Well, I'm pretty sure that's supposed to be an RWS, and that there's not actually anybody in it. But anyway, I digress. You can either upgrade the visual range the same way that does here. Where's mech? There's mech. Or, well, no, that's just armament difference. Or, I'm trying to find a good comparison real quick. And I'm not sure there is one. Anyway, or the other alternative being that this extra box on the side of the RWS, right here or right here, adds a laser designator. And one thing that I thought of, also it appears in this one right here, that alongside the cage armor that the Spartan gets, it looks like you have the option of swapping out the M2 Browning with a Mark 19. It also looks like you have the option of swapping out the M2 Browning with a Mark 19 over here as well. But one idea I just had while I was poking around the BRM-3K, come on, thank you, is that it might do both. Increase the visual range and give you a laser. In much the same way that going with the 2A72 increases your visual range and gives you a laser on the BRM-3K compared to going with the 2A90. So that could be an option. And as I touched on, it does appear to have a cage armor package. Which I'm assuming is, again, going to be a lot like this. Just upping the armor and upping the overall protection slightly, but it's not going to be to the same degree as something like what Strat does on the Striker, or um, what Busk does on the Bradley. It's not going to up the protection that much. It's just going to up the protection somewhat. I mean, it's still going to be useful. It's probably going to help you tank 1, maybe 2 shoulder-fired AT rockets. And I do mean shoulder-fired AT rockets, because if you get hit with a dedicated ATGM, it's probably not going to matter that much. But against something like an RPG-26, it might help. It might allow you to eat 1 extra hit. So. And then we have infantry. And if I'm going to be entirely honest, with the way the infantry is lined up, I can't really tell what what units go where. But before I want to get into infantry, I want to acknowledge the reconnaissance infantry, because apparently there's 2 types. There's combat recon and there's infiltrators. And I have a nagging suspicion this is kind of like, to use SOCOM here, infiltrators are kind of like Green Berets, or maybe PDSS, or Desant Key here. It's not Desant Key. Diversant Key? Diversant Key? These guys. And the reason why I say that is because what I think they mean by infiltrators is units that have 3 stealth versus units that have 2.5 stealth. Now, on that logic, infiltrators consist basically of sniper teams, so VDV snipers, these guys don't change, do they? No, they don't. VDV snipers, more snipers, or just snipers, I guess. Because... oh, their stealth does change. Interesting. VDV snipers, they don't have a sniper team. I mean, technically they do, but I don't think it counts. Regular snipers, scout snipers, airborne snipers, and then ranger snipers or green berets, which I'd like to point out, unlike the what's-its, these guys don't have a stealth value that changes with the upgrade that you fit on them. And so that, I think that's what they mean by infiltrators. Because if you come over here, hang on. If you come over here, you have this, which, I mean, I can't speak Estonian, but I'm pretty sure that's just snipers. And I'm also pretty sure this is snipers in Latvian. I haven't put any of that into Google Translate. That's what I think, and I don't know. That's just what I'm going off of. And then we have combat recon, and I suspect combat recon is closer to things like force recon, Resvedka, navalized Resvedka, VDV Resvedka, Spetsnaz, or pararescue / STTs, Ranger, RRC, Scouts, Cav Scouts, and I think I already said force recon. So that, I think, is how they're dividing up the two different recon teams. I just want to acknowledge that, because more than likely it appears that if I go back to that picture, you can't. So one thing that honestly annoys me with these pictures, and I love them, especially the large overall, the large overview pictures like these, is that it's really, really hard to actually tell what individual units are in what. Or not units. What individual infantry are in what units. Now, I mean, if I had to make a guess, zooming in on this picture, You have what appears to be a sniper team over here with a very large rifle. I don't think that's a Barrett. Honestly, that looks kind of closer to the, what is it, ASVK that the Russians use? No. Here we go. Yes. These things. It looks kind of closer to that. At least with the long barrel and the wide muzzle brake. But the stock is all kinds of different. At the same time, though, it does not look like an M107 either. The stock is also very different, and it doesn't have that partial barrel shroud. So I'm not entirely sure what rifle that is, but if I had to make a guess, it's probably firing 12.7 by 99. So it's probably going to have performance similar to the M107 or the ASVK. As for looking over the other infantry, we appear to have another sniper team over here. And that these three guys might be in their own individual squad. And these four might be the other infiltrator squad mentioned. The, what's the word? These ones, the KNT. And I say that because I'd like to point out that units like Green Berets and these guys, no, I don't know how to pronounce that, are also in four-man teams, and also PDSS as well. And then, which would presumably leave the infantry in the background, which, now that I look at it, they are kind of grouped in different, well, groups, but still it's a bit confusing. The infantry in the background are presumably the combat recon, and it looks like we have a 6-man team back here, a 7-man team here, with what appears to be, or at least one of them has a Carl Gustav. And these guys don't. The ones over here, that is. And then we have 1, 2, 3, 4. A larger 8-man team over here, which is pretty chunky, if I'm going to be entirely honest. I cannot think of a single recon team in the game that actually has more than 6 guys. So both of those are pretty large. I'm pretty sure. 4, 6, 6, 3, 6, 3, 3, 6, 3. What's that, 5? That's 5, that's 2. No, that's not 3, that's 2. That's also 5, that's 4, that's 6, that's 6, that's 4. That is 5, that is 3, and that is also 5. Okay. So if those are the combat recon, then those are some very large squads, which is interesting. Anyway, onto the infantry, finally. And again, with the way they're laid out, it's kind of hard to tell who is who and what is what. But the arrangement is interesting with the way they have everything laid out here. You have mechanized infantry, which I'm assuming is kind of like I'm assuming it's kind of like the Motostreliki, Motoporovka? Not sure how to pronounce that. Or mech riflemen. Or along this similar vein, things like troopers. Something along those lines. And you have those. And then you have volunteer forces, which is very interesting to me. Here we go. Yes. Hang on. Which is all very interesting to me, because I wonder if by volunteer forces they mean something like the oh nuts, what's it called? It's not Resvedka. It's like reserve something. It's similar to reserve. Huh? Anyway. Russians, infantry. These guys. I wonder if it's similar to these guys. So, I don't know. And I guess we'll find out eventually. But I wonder if it's similar to them. If that's what they mean by volunteer forces. They also have special forces, and I'm assuming this is something like Delta, SSO, or Marine Raiders. Or the Cherry Berries, the elite naval infantry. Not entirely sure in here who is who and what is what, which again goes back to that gripe that I mentioned, but is still worth but it's still worth me pointing out these infantry units, is what I'm trying to say. Also, speaking of infantry, let's just look at some of these names and try and compare it to what we have here. SD. Focus. Okay, so that's what that is. So 8-man team layout roughly like that. I wonder if, no. 9-man team laid out like that. And then we have, which corresponds with this, which those are older weaponry, except for the Moz. The Moz is pretty good. And that's not it. I don't think we have anything similar to those in here. Also, I can't find these guys, which is kind of weird because I could have sworn that they were in there. They're not, apparently. There's SE Scouts. And then there's these guys. So. And then we have the anti-tank teams involving Milan, which, if memory serves, is a French light ATGM. Kind of similar to things like the Melts, if memory serves. The Melts or the Faggot or the possibly Conkers. And then Javelin, which needs no introduction, and then the Spike LR, which is similar to the Javelin. It's not the same. It's still top attack like Javelin is, but it's similar to the Javelin. Anti-aircraft teams with the RBS-70, which is a Swedish system, the Perun, or or Perun, which is a polar system, and Grom, which is also a polar system. In fact, I think Perun is a successor to Grom. And then heavy weapons teams, including an M2 Browning, a GM, which I think is supposed to be a general purpose machine gun, and then an M2 Browning plus a GMG. So, although it's worth noting, that guy appears to have a Mark 19. And then you have what I assume to be various manpads here. This, I believe, is the Milan launchers over here. And let me take a look at those, a closer look at those. Are those... No, those appear to be M2 Brownings. Okay. That, I think, is a spike launcher. That is probably an RBS 70. This guy appears to have a Javelin, which again needs no introduction. This guy appears to have a Mark 19 or something similar to a Mark 19. It may not necessarily be a Mark 19, but it appears similar to one. Also, I can't help but notice that you have... I can't help but notice that... I'm curious if we're going to have something similar to cat teams as I'm looking at this. Because I can't help but notice that the way these guys are positioned, it kind of looks like the man pads, like, you've got the guy with man pads right next to a guy with a Mark 19, and you have a guy with an ATGM right next to a guy with a Mark 19. And I'm wondering if we're going to have something similar to cat teams, in that we have an ATGM and a machine gun. What on earth is going on here? No idea. Hang on. G-A, or J-A-L-A. Yeah. Okay, so we do have these guys. Alright, 8-man team. I thought we had them. Lot of vision. Although, these stats probably aren't the best to go off of, because this is before the update. So, just ignore pretty much everything in this top bar. I'm mainly trying to look at the weaponry here. 8-man team. I mean, heck, this may not even be a good, this may not be a good... Things may change is what I'm trying to get at. So, I might not even bother. Moz. Actually, while we're here... Okay, there have that, you have that SUV, which I'm pretty sure there's only one SUV in the game, and that is not going to be... Yeah. I'm pretty sure this isn't the recon team in question. Although I kind of wish we had more of these, like, to use. Also, fun fact, this is the fastest vehicle in the game. Well, the fastest land vehicle in the game. KNT. KNT. Nope. SNI, or SNAI, which I have a nagging suspicion isn't going to lead to anything, but I will check it. Yeah, it just leads to these two, which I'm pretty sure isn't what they are referring to here. So they have that. KAIT. KAIT. Is that what they're talking about? That might actually be what they're talking about. They just dropped the first word. Okay. Some G3s, which... Oh, they have a 450 meter range. Makes sense, because if memory serves, the G3 is shooting 7.62 rather than... Yeah, I think the G3 is shooting 7.62 rather than 5.56. In fact, you can make an argument that should go up to 500. But we will see. There's that there, that was there. That KASP. KASP. Okay, well, that's not here. ZEME, which I believe was already there, but we will take a look. Yes. And again, it appears to basically be the same layout. Okay, so I have a nagging suspicion that's going to change. Because it'd be kind of pointless to have two squads that are effectively exactly the same under two different names. ESTSOF. So I'm just going to go out on a limb here and say that isn't in the game. No. ZALI. ZALI. Nope. Milan, Javelin, Spike LR. And none of that is likely going to be in the game. So hit that. So, if I'm going to be entirely honest, G-Wagon with an RBS 70, which appears to have stats very similar to Stinger, all things considered.
Recon vehicle standing by.
RBS 56, which is one of the more obscure weapons, and its top attack. If memory serves, the RBS 56 was actually the first top attack munition out there, or that was developed. So that's interesting.
You'd be blind without us.
Wait, zoom. Thank you.
Reconnaissance standing by.
Mapats. Another top attack system. Mapats. That's... I mean, it seems obvious to say that's not the same as Milan. That's like, well, duh. But I can't remember who has that system. Javelin team. Stinger team, which I suspect that's going to be removed and replaced with something else. Oh. Am I just blind and I completely didn't see them? I think I'm just blind and I completely didn't see them. Completely didn't see them. Yeah, I'm... Okay. Vehicles, G-Wagon, Humvee with Spike LR, which has similar stats to Javelin. Honestly, the idea that it would have similar stats to Javelin doesn't necessarily seem all that strange, because I wouldn't be surprised if the Spike LR in-game does actually have similar stats to Javelin. For that matter, we do have a Spike LR team. And again, similar stats to Javelin. That's probably not going to make it. It's probably not going to be part of it. And RBS 70, M2 Browning, RBS 56. Okay. And then we get into vehicles. And now, there's some interesting images over here. Firstly, we have not a Humvee, we have an M113. And the M113 appears to be very similar to the US version of the M113 with the add-on armor. Although I can't help but think that the one with the cage armor in the background also has a Mark 19. Or has a Mark 19 in place of the M2 Browning, so that's probably going to be an upgrade option. We also have the Vilcus over here, which I'm probably just going to end up calling a Boxer, or if I call it a Boxer, what I'm referring to is the Vilcus specifically, because that's basically what it is. It's a Boxer, but instead of having a troop-carrying module in the back, you have... It's basically an IFE version of the Boxer. The Boxer is it's an 8-wheeled chassis, but the thing about it is that the module, unlike something like a Striker where you have, for example, the entire vehicle is what it is, you have a module that you can pop off. So what you have is you have the engine, the driver's compartment, and the basic drivetrain, chassis, and things like that as one piece, and then you have a module which could be troop carrying, ambulance, command and control center, or in this case an IFV version, which you can then pop on the back. And that's basically what a Boxer is. The Vilcus is a version of the Boxer, so if I end up calling it Boxer, I'm referring to the Vilcus. We have the Vilcus, and then we have the XA180, which I highlighted in a earlier video. Does appear to get an armor package. Also, if I can't... Looking at this picture, it appears that, and if this is the case, this is rather amusing. It appears that part of the armor package is just closing the armored hatches over the windows, which makes sense, yes, but it's also kind of funny to me that how are we going to up-armor the vehicle? Oh, simple. We're just going to close the metal hatches over the glass windshield. But I think one of the most notable things is the CV9035 here. Now, there's two variants of the CV9035 that we'll see in the next picture. And this appears to be a completely different turret from the typical CV9035. The most notable change is probably the APS. It appears to have what appears to be Iron Fist, the Iron Fist APS. Also, I thought I saw a picture that seemed to imply that the Vilcus gets APS as well. I may be wrong about that. I have not seen anything in this list that implies that the Vilcus can get APS, and looking at the Vilcus in the massive multi-unit picture at the start, if I can find the Vilcus again, where is it? There it is. It does not appear to have APS either, even though there appears to be two of them lined up. And I'm not entirely sure why there'd be two of them lined up instead of just one. I'm talking about this picture. The Vilcus back here. There's two of them, and I'm not sure why. And then we have the vehicles as a whole. And again, we have the M113s over here. We have two Vilcus over here. Is there a plural for Vilcus? I don't know. And I can't see any difference between these two vehicles except one has a different camo job than the other. So maybe you get an option of either with or without an ATGM. And again, you can see the XA180 with or without the armor package. I'd like to point out that the guns on the XA180 are different, so you'll likely have the option of swapping between an M2 Browning or a Mark 19, much like you do with the M113. Also, you can see what I'm talking about with the armored hatches over the windows here. You can see that better. We have a pair of Humvees basic Humvees. I'm not sure if they have an armor package. They don't appear to. You do have a gun shield over the M2 Browning or the Mark 19, but I don't think that's going to offer any extra protection. You do, however, appear to have smoke launchers, which is nice. So you're probably looking at a light transport vehicle similar to the Humvee and Airborne. We also have the G-Wagon, and in these pictures, the G-Wagon looks very, very similar to the what is it, IFAV? I think it's the IFAV, which the Marine Corps uses, which the Marine Corps doesn't actually use anymore. So, Recon, Marines. Yes, this thing. It looks very similar to that thing. Which, honestly, I don't mind. Okay, I don't want to spend too long going in on this tangent, but if I'm going to be entirely brutally honest, I have seen far too many people complaining about what they think is just copy-pasting units from the campaign into the DLC, and why either A, that's taking so long, or B, calling it that it sucks and that it's not a real DLC. I think if people are actually willing to get their hands on it, or once people get their hands on it, and if they're willing to actually, swallow their pride and admit that they're wrong, when the DLC comes out, you're gonna see that things aren't just the campaign units that have been given a different card, for lack of a better term, like these pictures here, that have been given a different picture and then thrown into a specialization. I think it's going to be much more than that. And all I can hope is that once that happens, and it becomes obvious that no, this is not just a copy paste of campaign units, that the appropriate, I can't say the appropriate people, because saying the appropriate people sounds like I have certain people in mind that I don't want to name, but that the people who say that are willing to admit that they're wrong. Anyway. Yes, certain people get on my nerves when they complain about the game. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't. The point I'm trying to get at is that this is an indie developer with a relatively small development team. Cut them some slack. Let them cook. Anyway, we appear on the IFAV. One of them appears to have a tow launcher, or not IFAV, but the G-Wagon. One of them appears to have a tow launcher. That one doesn't appear to have an armament.
Recon vehicle, ready for action.
And that has an RBS 7.
Recon vehicle, ready.
Oi. So, okay. One of them appears to have a tow launcher similar to this. So this is the Mapats. And I don't know if that means that you'll actually have Mapats, because that really does look like a TOW 2A launcher, so you might get TOW 2A. That one, again, looks like a tow launcher, but I think that's the RBS.
Recon vehicle is good to go.
Yes, it is. And then this one, specifically this one appears to have a tow launcher. And then this one appears to have what I'm assuming is the RBS 56. It's not super clear because they don't list it here. But they're talking about infantry carrying vehicles, and they don't name the Humvee, which is kind of interesting, although I assume you can carry infantry in it. But you have the CV9035, the IFE Vilcus, the M113, and the XA180. Speaking of the CV90, I was talking about the turret. You can see the original, for lack of a better word, turret here, and then you have this one with a different turret. Now, you see this space right here on this turret. If we go to this picture and we look at the, and we find the CV90 over here, it appears to have a Vilcus-style missile launcher in the turret. Now, that's something that the CV90 itself doesn't have, at least to my knowledge. is a missile system. So what I'm assuming when it comes to the CV-90 is we're going to have a base CV-90, which is probably going to look like this one. And then for a decently pricey upgrade, we're going to have the option of just swapping out the turret entirely for one with an ATGM and an APS. I have not seen anything that appears to suggest an add-on armor package, a la things like the busk kits on a Bradley. So this might be something kind of like a better comparison might be to something kind of like the what's it called? The B11 or the B15 or the B10. The designation changes with the designation changes with the weapon system you mount on it, but what I'm talking about is this thing. The Kurgansk, if I pronounced that correctly. Probably didn't. So I don't see an armor package option, so we might be looking at something like this with the option of mounting the APS and or the missile system, which would probably be in a single upgrade because it looks like an entirely different turret. So you might have the option of swapping the one turret out for the other. Kind of like how on this thing you have the option of going from the hang on. Kind of like how you have the option from swapping out the different turrets. I'm trying to think of the modules. You got the Apolka module, and it's not the Kinzol module. You have the basic chord. It's the boomerang module. Kind of like how you can swap out turrets like this is what I'm trying to get at. So. However, oh yes, and we also have the tank, the Leopard 2A8, which you have 3 variants of the tank, seen here. You have this one, which appears to be the basic version. You have this one, which appears to have something akin to a Tusk kit, along with an M2 Browning on an RWS. And then you have this one, which appears to have an APS, while also having the Tusk kit. At least I think. It's kind of hard to tell. It looks like it has the same geometry on the hull sides. Does it? Actually, no. I don't think that one has the Tusk kit on it. But I'm not entirely sure the Tusk kit or the APS is going to be mutually exclusive in the same way that the extra armor on the M8 is mutually exclusive with the APS. I'm not sure that's going to be the case. It's probably going to be similar to the Tusk kits on the Abrams. And then we have what is by far, in my opinion, one of the most interesting vehicles in this entire list. And it's one of the primary reasons why I wanted to make this video. And that is these 3. These 3 are just listed as the Type X. Here's the thing about the Type X, or Type 10. I'm just going to call it Type X. If you're looking at the Type X, and in particular, if you're looking at the front of the vehicle and asking yourself, where on earth is the driver's hatch? They don't have one. Because these are UGVs, or unmanned ground vehicles. Now, this is something that I think it's the Lithuanians are actually looking at. And there's a variety of weapon options for them, some of which are very interesting. The first one, well, I say some of which are very interesting. There's a variety of weapon options in real life for them, up to and including a 50mm autocannon, which I'm not actually sure we're going to get in game. Although it would be funny if we did, if only because it would make all the people whining about the Bookers. You know, if only because it would make all the people whining about the Booker cry. Even though I'd like to point out, and again, I'm going to go on a bit of a tangent here. For everyone who whines and complains about this thing right here, I want to introduce you to something. And okay, yeah, sure, it's not a Booker analog. It doesn't have APS, and it isn't as tough. You can also throw it at the back of a plane, and it can swim. I have yet to see people... Well, firstly, I haven't seen people complaining about this. I also, to be fair, haven't seen people using this the same way they've been using the Booker. However, if we do... I'll just like to point out this thing's almost like... If you drop the extra armor, which, sure, you have 2 hit points less, but it's literally half the cost of the Booker. And I think you can get a total of 8 of these versus a total of 6 of these. I suspect, though, that if the Type X is going to have a 50 millimeter autocannon, it's going to be more akin to the PT-76 this thing, rather than the actual Booker itself, especially seeing as it doesn't have any option to mount an APS. There are 3 different armament options that we have here, at least that I can see. This one over here appears to have what I think is a 30mm M230 and something like a Javelin on an RWS. This one over here appears to have a 30mm Bushmaster 2. In fact, it looks like it's literally it looks like it's the same as the Dragoon turret on the Striker. So we're probably looking at a 30mm Bushmaster 2 and a coaxial 7.62. Actually, hang on. The muzzle brake is different between this and this, so it actually kind of reminds me more of the CV90-35, so what that might actually be is a 35mm gun. And then we have this version over here, which has a smaller gun, maybe 20 or 25mm, and what looks like a couple of tubes for a small ATGM system. If we go up here and we look at the 2 variants present in this picture, firstly, the side angle here makes me think that this is an M230 or something similar to it. And then this mount over here, you can see the smaller caliber gun, which looks like, again, a 20mm. So I'm not entirely sure if we're going to get an option amount of 50mm autocannon on this thing, but it'd be kind of fun if we did. And I think that's everything in the vehicles to cover for the vehicles. Next, we have support. And this is where things get interesting. Because in the support tab, or the support lineup, the first thing I'll point out is that we have 3 155mm howitzers. Now, here's the thing about the 155. Okay? This isn't necessarily unusual. I think there's a couple of specializations that have 3 155s. Or there's a number of them that I know have 2. Like Guards has 2. Mech has 2 if you consider taking the 2S5. And when you think about it, if you consider the Acacia, the 2S5 and the 2S7 together, then you can argue it has 3 heavy artillery systems, which isn't necessarily unusual. Which would make the Baltic Battalion not unusual, is what I mean. Armor Brigade has 2, and... okay, well, that's about it. But having 3 of them are kind of weird, in my opinion. And it's not just that we have 3, because we have an M109A5, which is, I'm assuming it's going to act very similar to the M109A6 in-game. But we also have these 2. This is obviously PZH-2000. This is a K9 variant. Here's the thing. Both of these variants have 155mm gun. Or not 155mm gun. A 52 caliber 155mm gun. And I'm genuinely not sure what the difference between these 2 is going to be. I'm not saying there couldn't be a difference. You might have something similar to the difference between the M109A6, the M109A7, and then the M1299. In that you have the M109A5 here as your basic artillery system. It's kind of cheap, but it's short range and doesn't fire too fast. Then you have your K9, which has the extended range similar to the M109A7. And then, instead of being an M1299 analog, the PZH-2000 could be a Koalicja analog. Because, as I discovered in one of my previous videos, the PZH-2000 in-game actually has a faster reload time than the Koalicja. So what it might be kind of like is having the M109A6, the M109A7, and the Koalicja in one specialization. I can kind of see that. But I still can't help but think that the artillery is kind of redundant. So, and I know I said this before, and I'm going to say it again, I wouldn't be surprised if they eventually take the Baltic Battalion specialization, break it up into 3 different specializations, 1 for each nation, and put that in game for a Baltic States nation. Because there is some equipment that they're including here that isn't actually... or there's some equipment that they aren't including here that is used by the Baltic States. I believe one of them operates Patriot. Patriot isn't in here. So, that's just my theory. I don't think it's going to happen soon, maybe in a couple of years, but that's just my theory. We have 2 versions of the M113 mortar, which again appear to have upgrades for a armor package. This one also appears to have an MG3 as its pintle mount weapon, whereas this one has an M2 Browning. So, excuse me, itchy nose. So that could be interesting. Instead of having a option between something like an M2 Browning or Mark 19, you have an option between a MG3 and an M2 Browning for a slight upgrade, I assume. But it's probably going to be an analog to this thing, except armed. So probably better than this thing. We also have the Unimog as a transport truck. We actually have 2 transport trucks, one of which, this one, appears to have a guy with... is that a MG3? No, that appears to be something like a FN Mag coming out the top, which is kind of interesting. I wonder if that's going to be an upgrade option or if that's just going to be the base configuration. So we have an Unimog, which appears to be roughly comparable to the MTB stat-wise. And then we have a large transport truck, which I'm assuming is going to be comparable to something like the LVSR or the M1075. Maybe it can haul slightly less. Instead of like maybe 15 metric tons, it can only haul like 12 metric tons of supplies. It's still going to be a lot. So I'm assuming it's going to fit in the same role. We then have the air defenses. And this is where things get interesting. because we have a version of the Unimog with a ZU-23-2 in the back. So I'm guessing this is going to be roughly similar to things like the... yes. So I'm guessing this is going to be roughly similar to things like the Ural 4320 with the ZU-23-2. Hang on. Armory, support, Russia. Things similar to this. That, or... There we go. Things similar to that, or gun system similar to this. Or this. And in fact, in the image, it looks like there's two guys there. So it looks like you're not going to have an option between going for something like the ZU-23-2 or the ZU-23-2M, where the second guy has been replaced with what appears to be a targeting system. So it looks like it's just going to be the basic ZU-23-2. Now, that isn't necessarily a problem, in my opinion. But what I'm going to be very interested in finding out is if we're going to have any upgrades to the cannon itself. Because you're supposed to be able to upgrade that, at least if I'm reading this correctly, with a Minstrel, which I believe is a French manpad system. And I think that's what this is here. In fact, I'm pretty sure that's what that is there, because I believe that's when they were doing their image silhouette challenges on the devlog a few weeks ago. I think they actually showed this one off as well. I have a couple of questions. Firstly, what is this thing right here, and is it a radar? And secondly, can this thing only fire one missile at a time? Because if this thing can only fire one missile at a time, it may not be the most effective air defense system. Because anyone who has... Let's be honest, a lot of manpad style fire and forget ATGMs kind of... Or not ATGMs. A lot of manpads style fire and forget systems kind of suck. Because you need multiple missiles to actually kill a helicopter. And the helicopter's going to dump flares, and it's going to result in most of them missing. So, I'm not entirely sure how effective that's going to be. Unless they somehow either hilariously jack up the rate of fire, or they make the missile itself hilariously effective. Don't know. I guess we're going to see in a couple of weeks. And then we get the systems in the back, and this is where the interesting thing happens. Also, I'd like to point out, they have replaced the Mercedes-Benz symbol. Well, I mean, technically it's Daimler Truck, makes the Unimog and a lot of these, but Mercedes-Benz is like a subsidiary of Daimler Truck, so I guess it doesn't really matter. But they've replaced the symbol with the broken arrow symbol, which I think is very amusing, so presumably so they don't get sued. But it's a nice touch. You then have NASAMs on the back of a truck, like this. I'm assuming this is a SHORAD system, which is a bit annoying. I'm not going to lie, because I have repeatedly said that I kind of wish they took, and I'm going to say it again. I've repeatedly said that I wish they took the Slam Ram launcher, this thing, they put it on the back of a Humvee, like this, a two-seat Humvee, like it is in real life, and then they put a NASAMS launcher in the back of an MTV, acting as a high-mat air defense system. And now there's no precedent for that if NASAMS is a SHORAD system, which is going to be a bit annoying. I mean, I suppose you can get around it if we're talking about using things like the different missile systems that some NASAMS are supposed to use. Because, okay, so the whole thing about NASAMS, and I believe SlamRam was a sort of a development of NASAMS, was that you were supposed to be able to use air-to-air missiles that were already in production, that a lot of countries in the West already had in service in your ground-based air defense launcher. Yes, the range and the altitude performance aren't going to be as good because you're firing it from a static launcher on the ground rather than an aircraft moving at several hundred miles an hour, at least 40, 50,000 feet up. But as a relatively short-range air defense system, it worked out pretty well. You have NASAMS 1, NASAMS 2, and NASAMS 3. However, to my understanding, Kongsberg, the company that makes the NASAMS, is trying to develop modifications of missile systems like the AIM-120 to better suit NASAMS itself, and to make it a better, longer-range system. Or not necessarily to better suit NASAMS, but to better suit being a ground-launched, or to being fired from a static ground launcher rather than an aircraft. So I suppose you can argue that there's still an option to make NASAMS a HIMAD system. And eventually, I said it before, I'll say it again, that's what I want to see. I want to see NASAMS as a HIMAD system. I want to see a NASAMS box launcher on a SlamRam, or not SlamRam, on an MTV, and make that a HIMAD. But as things currently stands, it appears to be a SHORAD system. And I say it appears to be a SHORAD system because we have the IRIS-T, specifically the SLM version. Now, this one is kind of interesting to me. And it's interesting to me for a couple of reasons. Firstly, the IRIS-T it's on the shorter range of your HIMAD systems. If memory serves, I think the Ukrainians have had some luck intercepting Iskander ballistic missiles with it, which is only something that large SAM systems like Patriot, IRIS-T, and supposedly S-300 are capable of doing, rather than SHORAD systems, because the ballistic missile is just traveling too fast and coming in from a pretty odd angle compared to what most SHORAD systems are intended to actually deal with. But it seems to be on the shorter range of the HIMAD. It seems to have a somewhat short range compared to most other HIMAD systems, is what I'm trying to get at. And so I wonder if we're going to have something kind of like a combination of the PAC-2 or the PAC-3 and the S-350. And I say that because I wouldn't be surprised if the IRIS-T, because it has 8 missiles, so I wouldn't be surprised if it comes out very similar to the PAC-3. 200 points, 8 missiles, 3,200 meter range. But you get an upgrade option for an extra 50 points, much like on the S-350, that boosts the missile range up to 3,600. But you still only have the 8 missiles. And I'm wondering if that's what they're going to do with it. I think it'd be interesting, but honestly, I do not know. All of this is just conjecture and speculation. So, still, having IRIS-T would be kind of interesting. Some people are probably going to claim that it sucks because it has a short range, like the PAC-3 Patriot. But a SAM is a SAM. regardless of or a high mat system is a high mat system regardless of its actual range. Also, I found out while poking around in the scenario editor, short systems can actually intercept ballistic missiles in this game, and I don't just mean like high quality SHORAD systems like the Tunguska M. I mean, I was having ballistic missiles intercepted by the gun systems, like the actual guns on a ZU-23-4. So I found that very amusing. Anyway, what we have next is, and these last two are going to go by real quick. What we have next is helicopters and aircraft. And again, there's not really much to actually dig into here, but we're going to go into helicopters first. We basically have two. We have the UH-60, and then we have the AS-365. Nose itchy. The AS-365 is... It appears to be something more akin to an analog for something like the UH-1Y. Or a... No. Helicopters. Something akin to an analog for something like, not that, like this. Although it's probably not going to carry that many guys. I still think it's going to be closer to an analog for something like this, rather than either of the MI8s, which actually, these are all called MI8s. Where's the other one? There's the other one. None of these are actually MI8s. They're all MI17 variants, which I found very, very amusing. I still think it's going to be closer to something like this, just without the door guns, with a slightly smaller troop carrying capacity than the Black Hawk, and the option of mounting either rocket pods or no. In this picture, it appears to have some kind of gun pod on it. This gun pod, I don't know what kind of gun pod it is. I'd be kind of surprised if it's only a 50 caliber, because it seems kind of large. So it might be some kind of 20mm autocannon. But I suspect it's going to be a rough analog to something like this, basically. So kind of like you have this option between either two, maybe 20, possibly 25mm autocannons, or two 19.2 Hydra 70 rocket pods. That, or we're going to get one or the other for like one side or the other, kind of like what we have for the Kiowa here. So that's my speculation for the AS-365. And then we have the Black Hawk. And I want to point something out with the Black Hawk, because I find this utterly hilarious. The Black Hawk over here appears to have an M240, or more likely a FN mag, as the door gun. This Black Hawk does not. This Black Hawk, as I zoomed into the image, very much appears to have a Mark 19 as in the door gun. I didn't even know you could put a grenade launcher as a door gun on a helicopter, but if you can, that is both awesome and very funny. That would also that would allow you to differentiate the Black Hawk in the Baltic Battalion specialization from the one in airborne infantry, because you have a unique weapon system. And I mean, it's already different enough from the one in SOCOM, but the one in SOCOM is the one in SOCOM. It's an MH-60 with much better vision. So, and then we have planes, and there's not really much to talk about here, although there is one thing I want to highlight, which I think could be very interesting. First, we have the L-39, and again, I'm going to go on a bit of a tangent here. I saw people asking things like why this specialization gets 60-year-old aircraft and the Leopard 2A8, which apparently, although I haven't done any independent research, the the Bundeswehr or the German military hasn't received yet. It's just like, calm down, okay? I said 60-year-old aircraft. I meant in the 1960s, which I guess would be 60-year-old aircraft. But I'd still like to point out, we're talking about a game where you have in a single specialization, where is it? There it is. The EA6 Prowler, which left U.S. military service in 2006, operating alongside the F-35B, which didn't enter U.S. military service until, I want to say 2018? Excuse me. So, okay, yeah, sure. There's a little bit of a, what's the trope name? Act. I don't know how to pronounce the trope name, but it's like acronym, something or other. Anyway, like having different things from different time periods. And I can actually give you another example with the power plant map. Where is the power plant map? Power plant. Here it is. This power plant was shut down in 2007. And yet it still exists in game. Not sure why. Well, actually, I know why, because the developers basically said that the actually, you know what I'm going to do? Oh no. What I need is that to make this a whole lot quicker. Where is it? Upcoming beta maps, Kaliningrad, River, Refinery, Ruda. Was it this one or was it another one? Airbase, Airport, Klaipeda. Okay, no, it was another one. Because I remember they made a post somewhere where they actually they actually addressed this specifically. And excuse me. Although I'm not entirely sure where. But I remember that they made a post where they addressed this specifically, noting that the power plant had been shut down noting that the power plant had been shut down in 2007, but basically saying that in the game's alternate universe it was still functional. Frontiers, which I think that's just highway, just renamed. They renamed a highway. Here we go. Note, the power plant was decommissioned in 2009, not 2007, in real life, but stayed active in Broken Arrow's lore. So, it's not supposed to be a one-to-one to to real life. Anyway, I digress. But I say that because I think that's what a lot of people either forget or don't understand or don't acknowledge, is that the game isn't supposed to be one-to-one to real life. It's a game. Anyway, again, I digress. Aircraft. The L-39 Albatross. Is it Albatross? Yeah. It says it right there, you dummy. Anyway, we have some options here. The first one appears to just have some AIM-9s. This one appears to have some Hydra 70 rocket pods. And this one in the back, I believe those are bombs. I'm not sure if they are... Actually, I'm kind of looking at the fin arrangement, and they might be snake eyes. So they might be retardant bombs. Still, I don't expect the I only expect the L-39 to be a relatively cheap platform. I'd be genuinely surprised if any of these loadouts bring it over maybe like 200 points or 250 points. It's probably going to be roughly along the lines of the Harrier. These two. It's probably going to be something similar to these. At least cost-wise. 250 points in the upper end. I'd be genuinely surprised if anything actually brings it up to like 300 points. I don't think you can get a Harrier up to 300 points. Well, you could probably get this one up to 300 points if you loaded it out with guided bombs. Like, okay, you're getting 320 points there. So 330, but I think that's about as expensive as you can get it. And the L-39 is probably going to be similar. And then we have the C-27J Spartan. Now, this is a light transport aircraft. I mean, if it looks like a mini C-130, that's kind of what it is. It's not really a mini C-130, but for all intents and purposes, that's what it is. And this is interesting because it's kind of going to be similar to this thing, the AN-72. The seating arrangement and the cargo are very similar. If memory serves, it can hold... I looked it up earlier today. Well, actually, it's yesterday at this point. I believe it can hold 60 guys and 9 metric tons of cargo, compared to the 52 and the 7500 of the AN-72P. However, what I'm genuinely interested in is the upgrade options, because there's multiple different types of the C-27. You have the basic transport option, and more than likely that's just what we get in game, is the basic transport option of the C-27. However, there were not one but two dedicated gunship variants of the C-27. You had the AC-27J Stinger II, which was kind of like a mini AC-130 that either had a 30 or a 40 millimeter cannon in the side, and was tested by the U.S. Army in the early 2010s, if memory serves, or the U.S. military, as a replacement for the AC-130, but ultimately did not pass. And then you have the MC-27, which is an Italian aircraft with hard points on the outer wings to mount precision-guided munitions, so presumably things like the Hellfires on the AC-130, and the back door, which is positioned roughly around here on the C-27, you can also stick a 30mm autocannon out the side of it. So, presumably, imagine something like... Imagine something kind of like an AC-130 kitted out like this, with, I mean, I'm assuming 8 Hellfires, but it could be as low as 4. But you don't get the 105, you only get the 30mm. The stats are probably kind of worse, maybe things like loiter time. But it's also cheaper, maybe only like 150, 160 points. Are we going to get that version of the C-27? Probably not, considering that one was a U.S. military program, and the other was an Italian military program. And we're talking about the Baltic states, neither of which qualify as either U.S. or Italian. But it could be interesting, and that's why I'm kind of interested to see what they do with it. More than likely, it's just going to be a light transport on the same basic vein as the AH-72. But still, I'm kind of interested to see what they do with it. Anyway, that's basically this. I will be making a video next week when we get a deeper dive into the specialization and a better look at the live event, which presumably is going to come out sometime next week. And if that's the case, then I suspect the DLC is going to come out on the week of the 22nd. So that's just my predictions. I will most definitely be making videos about the DLC when it comes out on the week of the 22nd. Exactly when it comes out is going to depend a lot. Because as things currently stand, what are you yelling at me about? Go away. As things currently stand, well, if it comes out before the 25th, I'm going to be making a video about the DLC on the 25th. Maybe looking at the new scenario maybe looking at the new scenario that they are talking about. If it comes out after that, the video about the new scenario is probably going to come out on the 1st. But a specialization overview, much like I did with the original 10, will most definitely be coming out on the 28th. So, yeah. As things currently stand, that's the plan. And trust me, I cannot wait